Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and this short video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous night of the local time. First we're going to talk about Krasnohorivka. If you remember, yesterday we discussed that according to Rybor, the Russian military expert, the Russians as a result of offensive operation managed to establish control to answer Krasnohorivka from the south and to establish control over the first streets. During the previous night we haven't received any updates that confirmed this piece of news, but we got some updates from different mappers, more or less reliable from the Russian side, that there was an attack, but the Russians as a result of that attack managed to establish control just over the fields and the tree lines to the south of Krasnohorivka. So based on some mappers, the Russians as a result of offensive operation during the previous days managed to establish control over something like this. There are a few important things that we need to understand about this progress. First of all, the Russians managed to bypass the water barrier. This is this is small water reservoir, small lake Balka Sukha, and this water reservoir was bypassed, crossed by the Russians, and the Russians, according to some mappers, managed to establish control over the first tree line on the Ukrainian side of the water reservoir. So this is very important and progress. Furthermore, based on these geolocations and these reports, we can see that the Russians managed to get as close as possible to the Ukrainian main defense belt on the fields between Georgievka and Krasnohorivka itself. So we are talking about this defense belt. And obviously the next step is to storm this territory from the Russian side, at least from two directions or even three directions. This might be the first direction of Russian attack, this might be the second direction of Russian attack, and very likely the Russians will try to conduct an offensive operation on the northern part as well. So the next few days probably we're going to receive additional updates from this territory. Now we are moving to Pobieda area. According to some mappers, the tree lines and the stronghold to the north of Pobieda and to the southwest of Marinka was captured by the Russians, and currently, according to those mappers, this territory is under complete Russian control. So this is a very important and advance from the Russian side. We see that the Russians continue movements further to the west in direction with the purpose to bypass Georgievka from the south and to establish half encirclement of the stronghold of the village from the south and of course from the north by taking those two strongholds. Very interesting details are coming further from the south of Pobieda. On this video, for example, that this video was published just this night, the Russian sources were FPV droning the Ukrainian forces in this next tree line to the south of Pobieda, which confirms the further additional Russian progress and that the Russians are moving their focus further to Paraskovyevka and Novomikhailivka. A lot of FPV drone bombings, lots of casualties from the Ukrainians, and we understand that the main purpose of the next Russian movement is to get as close as possible to this stronghold and to cut the main supply roads that goes to this stronghold from Novomikhailivka and Paraskovyevka. This is the first supply road, and this is obviously the second supply road that Ukrainians have in this area. And if the Russians are able to get as close as possible to this territory, let's say to this part of the tree lines, then at least one of the supply roads will be cut off. And currently we don't know the destiny of the second one because the Russians during the previous weeks also had additional progress to the south of the stronghold. So the situation in Novomikhailivka is getting worse and worse every day. Now let's talk about Avdiivka. During the previous night we haven't received anything from this area, just a report from the Washington Post that Ukrainians were abandoning their positions not due to the order of Ukrainian military authorities, but that because the fact that they made that decision, they decided themselves to run away, and they were running, abandoning significant number of armored vehicles, tanks and ammo and so on. Let's wait what the new day will bring us about this area. Very interesting reports we got also from the Western media, and according to Bloomberg, for example, war in Ukraine turns in Putin's favor after months of stalemate. Obviously, the situation will continue developing not in Ukrainian favor, and more Western sources and reliable resources reported that during the 2024, the Russians will try to get additional territories until Zelensky will be forced to sign a peace agreement and to capitulate. Now we are moving further to Kupiansk direction, because during the previous night we got significant number of updates from this territory. We have additional progress in the vicinity of Sinkovka. According to different mappers, the Russians managed to improve their positions inside of Sinkovka itself, in the northeastern part, and in the tree forest that located to the north of Sinkovka. So according to some mappers, the Russians managed to bypass some square kilometers and to establish control over this territory. This is very important because the Russians bypassed first of all these fields and entered this part of let's say forest. This conclusion was made based on these videos that were published by the Ukrainians, a lot of FPV drone strikes against the Russian forces, and so on. Now we understand that the next Russian goal is to complete the clearing of this part of the forest that is separate from the rest of let's say forest with small roads, and after that very likely the Russians will complete the clearing of this part of the forest, and then the Russians will have possibilities to move further. But the progress in the vicinity of Sinkovka is not the only update we received during the previous night. According to information we have, the Ukrainians start redeployment significant number of forces to Sinkovka, a lot of brigades from Dnipro, Zaporozhye, from Kherson directions, with the purpose to stabilize the line of combat contact. Additional sources reported that currently the Ukrainians concentrated significant number of forces around the city by the name of Krasnohorivka. This is approximately the concentration of Ukrainian forces, and we see that the Ukrainians are trying to concentrate their army right in front of the area where the Russians during the previous months had the, let's say, progress in the area of Tabaevka, Krakhmalne. And as you can see, and have you mentioned that after the Russian progress in Tabaevka, Krakhmalne, we can see a very long operational pause, and obviously within the next few days this operational pause will be ended by the Russians, and then they will restart it or renewed offensive operation, and very likely in direction of Krasnohorivka or in direction of Kruglyakivka. So these two settlements are the target number one for the Russians. This one Krasnohorivka and this one Kruglyakivka. Furthermore, the Russians reported that during the previous night the Russians managed to discover the redeployment of Ukrainian forces using the railways, and they started bombing the railways heavily with artillery, with FABs, with aviation, with rockets, with missiles, with everything they have. And very likely today we're going to receive additional updates and geolocated videos of destroyed Ukrainian trains with infantry and armored vehicles on board. Now let's go to Rabotino area. During the previous night we got few additional updates about the progress on the ground. If you remember, yesterday the pro-Ukrainian and neutral sources reported about restoring control over the tree lines to the south of Rabotino. This morning the Russians reported that they managed to repel these positions once again, and Ukrainians now let's say abandoned the positions and fell back. So the situation is very complicated, but currently we know for sure that this area is the main line of combat contact where the parties try to establish control over this let's say rich network of the fortifications. According to other sources, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the fields between Rabotino and Verbova and to establish additional control over the fields. This conclusion was made by most of the mappers based on this video where that was published by the Ukrainian forces by the 82nd Air Assault Brigade. On this video we can see how brigade was bombing with FPV drones the Russian infantry and forces in the field. So based on that video, most of the mappers made the conclusion about additional Russian progress in this direction. So the Russians continue digging in deeper and digging into Ukrainian defense belt with the purpose to completely split the territory in two parts. Interesting details continue coming from Krynki area. According to some Russian military experts like Ryber, for example, there are still a few tens of soldiers in Krynki themselves, up to from 20 till 40 soldiers. Very difficult to understand whether it's true or not, because the official sources reported about complete control over the village, but also the Russians are saying that regarding the number of forces in Krynki themselves, there are still a lot of Ukrainian soldiers on the islands between Ukrainian bank of the river and Russian bank of the river. And when talking about the islands, there are around 200 soldiers of the Ukrainian forces. Currently, I'm talking about these territories. So once again, according to pro-Russian resources. There are around 200 soldiers exactly on this area. So that's why we need to understand that if there are 200 soldiers, that means that there are no problem for the Ukrainians if they want to start another meat grinder to send some group of Ukrainians to Krynki or something like this. And obviously during the next months they will try to do this, at least when the weather is going to get better. Also, the Ukrainian sources published the video of few HIMARS strikes on the south of Kherson. As a result of those strikes, significant number of Russian soldiers were wounded and killed. We will not watch the video due to significant casualties, but if you have access to map, you can find the videos to the south of Krynki of HIMARS strikes against the groups of Russian soldiers. Up to 100 soldiers from different strikes were destroyed during those operations. Now let's talk about Kiev and the situation in the world. And the thing is that the Russia increased its military production. According to information we have, the Russians are able to produce hundreds of tanks each year, and the Russians continue increasing this production of T-80, T-90 and more, let's say, upgraded old models of tanks and so on. But when talking about the Western countries and Western support, for example, today we got a report that France currently have some problems with military and any help to Ukraine. If you remember, just a few days ago, France and Zelensky and Ukraine signed security agreement during the fall of Avdiivka, and there were lots of promises, but a few days later we see that France have problems to send any of 3 billions to Ukraine. And the same story we got from Canada. Canada promised to help Ukraine, but now we see that Canada is not going to increase the production of artillery rounds because it's not smart, according to Canada. So very interesting point of view, and that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.